Today, we're going to talk about a time when one private citizen, a banker, was arguably more powerful than the President of the United States and had direct control over the entire American economy.
Okay, so I want you to picture this. Imagine a world with no financial safety net. That was America back in the 19th century, a time before central banks were even a thing.
Before the United States had its own Federal Reserve to step in and prevent a total financial collapse. And really, before the government had a truly firm grip on the money flowing within its own borders.
So, in that power vacuum, who was really calling the shots?
Well, the answer was a single man, John Pierpont Morgan. You probably know him as J.P. Morgan. All right, that brings us to our first section, a power before presidents. You see, Morgan's influence wasn't just about business. We're talking about a scale that totally dwarfed the government itself.
I mean, just think about this for a second. This guy wasn't an elected official. He was a banker. And yet, he was financing wars for entire nations, single-handedly propping up the U.S. government when it was about to go under, and basically, through his money, deciding which countries got to thrive and which ones, well, didn't.
So the big question is, how on earth did one guy get that much power? And that leads us right into Section 2. Chaos creates an opening. The whole situation at the time was just perfect for someone like him. See, Morgan was born into a banking family way back in 1837. And he didn't just inherit a bunch of money. He inherited a mindset, a core belief. For him, money wasn't just for spending or buying stuff. No, its real purpose was control. Control over industries, over markets, and, yep, even over governments. And this is where it gets really interesting, because 19th century America was the perfect storm for this philosophy. It was like the Wild West of finance. Banks failed all the time. Entire industries, like the railroads, would just collapse. Markets were in a constant state of panic. And the most important part? There was no central authority, no Fed, to come in and clean up the mess.
And this is where you really see Morgan's genius. Because where everyone else saw complete disaster, he saw a golden opportunity. He understood that when things get chaotic, power shifts, and it shifts to whoever can create order. He didn't fear instability, he absolutely thrived in it.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 3, the man who saved America. And I'm not being dramatic here. Let's look at two of the biggest financial crises in U.S. history where Morgan, a private citizen, literally stepped in to save the day. So first up, we've got the 1895 gold crisis. The U.S. government was flat broke, literally running out of gold. Its credit was garbage, and the whole country was staring down the barrel of financial ruin. And Congress? Way too slow to do anything about it. So who did they call? Not another country. They called J.P. Morgan. And what does he do? He just pulls together a private group of bankers and loans the U.S. Treasury $65 million in gold. Just like that, he pulls the government back from the edge. A private citizen just bailed out the entire United States. That's wild. But you know what? That was just the warm-up act. Fast forward to 1907, and a much, much worse crisis hits. We're talking a full-blown, nationwide panic. Banks failing left and right, the stock market is in an absolute free-fall, there's total fear across the nation. Morgan's response to this is the stuff of legends. He literally calls the country's most powerful bankers to his personal library in New York and locks the doors. He told them nobody was leaving until they figured out a rescue plan. He personally orchestrated the whole thing, deciding which banks got bailouts, which ones were forced to merge, and which ones were just left to die. For weeks, the fate of the American economy was decided in that one room by that one man. And it wasn't just banking, not by a long shot. His power stretched everywhere. He consolidated whole industries, creating massive monopolies that controlled the very backbone of the American economy. We're talking steel, railroads, electricity. He's the guy who created U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation. Okay, so that brings us to Section 4, a power too big. Because eventually, people started to look around and ask a pretty reasonable question. Should one guy, who answers to absolutely no one, have this much control over, well, everything? And this slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have J.P. Morgan, who can bail out the Treasury and stop a national panic by locking some guys in a library. And on the other side, the U.S. government, slow, clunky, with limited tools, and seemingly powerless to stop these crises from happening. The power imbalance was just staggering.
So naturally, this led to a lot of fear. It spread through the public, it spread through Congress. The whole idea that a single, unelected banker was basically running the show was, frankly, terrifying. People started asking, why is a private citizen doing a job that the government is supposed to be doing?
And the answer to that question came in 1913. The Federal Reserve System was created, and you can think of it as being born directly from Morgan's shadow. Yeah, its official job was to prevent financial crises, but its unofficial and maybe more important job was to make sure that no single person could ever hold that much financial power ever again.
All right, so that brings us to our last section, Section 5, the Morgan Legacy. Because even with the Fed, this story is far from over. Morgan's influence is still all around us.
Just look at this timeline. It's kind of crazy, right? JP Morgan dies in 1913, the Federal Reserve is created in 1913. That's no coincidence. It really was the end of an era. But his power didn't just disappear. The financial empire he built, it just evolved. Today, we know it as JP Morgan Chase, one of the biggest and most powerful banks on the entire planet. The man was gone, but the system he perfected, he was here to stay.
You know, J.P. Morgan never held public office. He never commanded an army. And yet, he held the fate of nations in his hands. His story really pulls back the curtain on a hidden truth about history, that real lasting power doesn't always sit in palaces or come from votes. A lot of the time, it sits in vaults.
And that leaves us with one last, really important question for today. JP Morgan's time is over, sure, but the vaults are still there. So the question is, who controls them now?